Hello everyone and welcome to another short data management video. Today we're going to talk about how you can protect your research data from a potential cyber attack. This is something that people are thinking a lot more about given the events in Ukraine, and people are perhaps realizing that if there was a cyber attack on their research institution, their data might be at risk and they're perhaps not secure as they could be. Unfortunately, cyber attacks on universities and research institutions are not a new thing. And in fact, if you do a quick Google search on cyber attacks on universities, you'll be returned with a whole host of news articles from different cyber attacks that have occurred at different universities globally. The threat is very real, but unfortunately people often don't think their own research institution is going to be affected until it's too late. The good news is that the current best practices are designed with this kind of threat in mind. So if you comply with these best practices that we'll outline today, your data should be protected in the event of a cyber attack. But of course we should remember that there are lots of ways in which you can lose your data. Perhaps a computer that you're working on breaks down, or the storage device breaks down. Perhaps you can't remember where you've stored your data and it's lost. Perhaps you move on from the university and the data that you've been working on for all of these years is missing because no one else can find it. So we're going to go through some best practices now on how to store your data. But we should keep in mind that storing your data should only be the short-term goal. The long-term goal should be to publish your data. Then the data center that you're publishing your data with will look after your data and make sure that they're available for a long time into the future. I've done another video on where you should be publishing your data, and I'll put a link down to that in the description. Okay, let's jump right in. A good place to start is that you should be making multiple copies of your most important data. A good rule of thumb is that you should have 3 copies of your most important data, and at least one of those should be stored off-site, so not at your research institution or university. Of course, not all places that you can store your data are equal, and we'll talk now a bit about what are good places to store your data and why, and what are not so good places. Perhaps a sensible place to start, because I suspect quite a lot of people are storing data like this, is to keep the primary copy of their data on their local computers. And whilst it's fine to have some data stored on your computer, of course it makes it easier for you to access them, I wouldn't rely on this to be the primary storage area where you're storing your data. Any computer can break down, you might spill some coffee over it, you might drop it down a flight of stairs. These things might sound like something out of a comic book, but they do happen. Another thing is, depending on the security settings and where you use your computer or laptop, it is possible for someone to hack into your machine and take your data. One place I see a lot of people backing up their data is on USB sticks or on USB storage devices. This can be good practice if done correctly. Of course, it's very good to have your data stored in somewhere that's portable. You can take it with you, you can take it home and secure it somewhere that is safe. But a risk associated with this is that anyone can pick up your device, plug it into their computer and take it with them. Universities and research institutions are usually quite open places. We're used to having a lot of guests, a lot of people we don't know walking around, and we don't often think twice about who they might be. But it could be quite easy for someone to come in and take a USB stick from someone's office and have a look at what's on that. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to discourage you from using USB storage devices. You absolutely should. I just want you to think twice about where you might be keeping it and who might have access to that. I would discourage you from keeping data on USB sticks for a long time. This isn't really what they're designed for. USB sticks are more for transporting data from one device to another. Your data aren't going to be compromised while they're on the stick. There's nothing to do with that really. But USB sticks can go missing very easily. They're really small, people often don't label them, people might have multiple sticks. It's quite easy to lose the data that are on there. One place that a lot of people are now storing their data is on the cloud. Somewhere like Microsoft OneDrive, Google Drive, there are a whole host of different cloud storage providers. And one thing you should be aware of is that not all cloud storage providers are equal, and you should check really carefully what kind of protection you're being offered. Now, I'm not going to go into any detail here comparing different cloud storage providers. This is, as you can imagine, quite a big topic, and there's actually a lot of information out there on the web already if you're interested in reading about that. However, there are a few key things that you should consider. Is your cloud service provider regularly backing up your data? So if your data is lost from there for some reason, can they be recovered? Are you using some kind of two-factor authentication, so it's much more difficult for someone to log in as you and access your data? And are you using a good, secure password? Cloud services are incredibly convenient. They allow you to access your data from anywhere in the world, from any device, as long as you have internet connection. But they're designed with this accessibility in mind. And so because of this, there's always an inherent risk that your data could become compromised. Cloud services can be hacked into. It might be very unlikely, depending on your cloud service provider and the deal that you have with them, but it is at least theoretically possible. And another risk is that you might expose your details. Perhaps you share your password in an email. Perhaps you use the same password for everything. Perhaps you leave your device lying around, you leave your office and someone can come in and take your data. So there's still a risk associated with storing your data with a cloud service provider. But there is an alternative and what we would like to recommend. In Norway and in Nansen Legacy, we recommend that you're storing your data with the National Infrastructure for Research Data, or NIRD for short. This is a national storage system that you can only access using either secure shell or a secure file transfer protocol, or SFTP. We'll get back to how these work in a minute, but if you're not familiar with these, trust me, they're not as scary as they might sound. Most of the data on NIRD are stored in project areas that multiple users can access. People need to register for every single project that they want to be able to access, and they need to be authorized by the people responsible for that project. If you compare this to the cloud, for example, usually only you can access your data on the cloud, and therefore if you move on, if you leave your institution or you leave the project, those data are lost. In contrast, in this system, you can have a common working area where multiple users from a project can work on the same data at the same time from their own research institutions. Nansen Legacy has a project area, UNAS has a project area, maybe your institution does too. That sounds great, right? But now I'm going to tell you how you can actually access NIRD. There's this page here that tells you how you can apply for a user account. It's quite straightforward, so I'll put a link down in the description and you can go and follow that. Once you've registered for the first project that you're applying for, you'll be given a username and password. You can then register for more accounts and you'll be able to access all of those projects using the same username and password. There are a few different ways in which you can access your data in NIRD. The first is using secure shell if you're particularly comfortable using the command line, for example. You do this by entering your command SSH for secure shell. Luke M here is my username at login.nird.sigma2.no, and this is all my host name. And this will log me into my user area on NIRD, and then I just have to navigate to the project area. The alternative is to use some kind of SFTP, which is a secure file transfer protocol. Basically, this just adds a user interface to this, and it's just dragging and dropping files across whenever you need them. One example of these that I'm going to focus on today is FileZilla, and I'll use that because it's cross-platform. You can install it for Windows, for Mac, or for Linux. So just go ahead and pick the link that you need. When you open FileZilla up, it looks something like this. So we can type in our host name, login.nird.sigma2.no. My username is Luke M, and I'll enter my password that I'm not going to read out. And I'll enter a port number. I'm just going to put 22 in here, hit quick connect, press OK, and I'm directed to my user account here on NIRD. If I want to go to the project area, I would have to go to NIRD here and to projects, and we can see all of the projects on NIRD. I don't have access to most of these, and I'm not going to show you what is in the projects that I do have access to on YouTube. But when you've found what you're looking for, you just have to drag and drop files across to copy them across from one to the other. And that's everything. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the like and the subscribe button. It really helps other people to find these videos. Thanks very much for listening.